Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Bianca. I am an international student currently based in the UK, and I make YouTube videos about my experience here, studying, working, and some traveling videos as well. And today we are entering episode 3 of my Oxbridge Application Series. If you haven't seen my other videos, just as a context, I have been accepted to study my master's at the University of Cambridge, and I decided to make this series so that it could be helpful for people who are also interested to apply to Oxford, Cambridge, or any other universities. In today's video, as you can see from the title, we will be talking about personal statement. I just want to put a disclaimer out there that I'm not necessarily saying that this is the best personal statement. It's more on how I personally approach my personal statement. You know, feel free to take whatever you think is useful for you. And if there's anything that you disagree with, it's, you know, feel free. Because I feel like writing in itself is a creative process. People have different approach, and this is just my approach. For my course, which is MPhil in Development Studies, they actually asked me this question: explain why you wish to do this course and how it fits into your long-term career plan. Now let's dissect the question first. It asks why development studies in specific, and also how it fits into your long-term career plan. So basically there are two things that you need to address in your essay. Number one, really understand what you will be studying. So when we think about, okay, I'll be studying, and I don't know, engineering or maths, we think we know what we'll be studying, but a lot of times we might miss the actual point, or we might not know, like, okay, yes, I'm gonna be studying maths, but what exactly in specific that I'm interested in. And for me, what I did was I went to the course page on the website and I look at each and every module or paper that they offer, and also the professors, and just in case, I have probably read a journal or any book that they have written before. And thankfully I've actually read one of the professors' books. Yeah, so 2 books that I read of his, and I actually included that in my personal statement. So number one is to really understand what you'll be studying, and if you can, highlight one specific topic that you have, you know, really genuine interest in. And number two, in terms of how to brainstorm, I also think that journaling really helps. And I do this thing called stream of consciousness journaling. I don't know if you've heard of it. I'll drop some links down below for resources on journaling, but for me, journaling helps me sort of understand myself better and understand my decision. Because sometimes, you know, when you think, okay, I want to study this, and then you just thought that I don't really know why. So actually reflecting on our experiences could really help you, because when you write personal statement, you want to have that sort of red thread. Is that what you call it? You want to have a clear sort of path in terms of what exactly led you to decide to apply. You can't just be like, I like Cambridge, or I like this course and that's why I want to apply. There has to be some sort of experiences that made you think, right, this is where I want to go, or like, this is where I want to study, and this is what I want to study. And if you're like me and you apply for master's right after your bachelor's degree, you might think that, oh, I don't really know what I want to do in terms of career goals, and I think that's totally fine. Everyone, especially if they're still young, still think that they don't know what they want to do with their life in terms of their career. So again, journaling really just helps you kind of pinpoint, okay, maybe this is the area that I want to work in, or maybe this is this sort of industry that interests me. And yeah, journaling. Okay, so my personal statement has 3 paragraphs: introduction, body, and closing. And so from the introduction, this is what I said. When I first started working towards my bachelor's degree in financial economics, I believed that social science disciplines could work independently. My simple understanding back then was that economic theory could stand on its own in, for example, increasing a nation's GDP, leading it to growth and prosperity. As if having a queen on the chessboard could lead one to win the game. whereas in reality, it takes multiple chess pieces and different moves to achieve a checkmate. It took me myriad books, historical Chinese dramas, a summer internship at Central Bank of Indonesia, and several iterations of reflection to realize that these different disciplines, economics, anthropology, politics, and history, are interconnected. To win in chess, one must understand the nature of these different pieces. So that's my opening paragraph. In your introduction, number one is you want to hook your reader in. You probably have heard of the term, you have to hook your reader so that they are actually genuinely interested to read your personal statement or your essay. And a lot of them actually will tell you to hook them in the first sentence. I actually did this in my Oxford personal statement, which I have a separate video for, but for my Cambridge personal statement, I used an analogy, and this is not just to hook them in the beginning, but there's this coherence that you will later see in terms of why I introduced this analogy. And number two, in your introduction, you sort of want to give a little bit of background information, but because you are gonna be submitting your CV or resume anyway, you don't want to sort of repeat too much of the information that you already put in your CV. So this is where I say things like, I watch a lot of Chinese historical drama, I read a lot, and I mentioned that I did an internship at the Central Bank, but yeah, that was also in my CV. But you don't want to overlap too much from your CV in terms of introducing yourself. And number three, I think this is just the way I approached mine. I introduced a little bit of vulnerability, like, hey, I had not always known what I wanted to do, but because of these experiences, this is the path that I want to take. That's kind of like how I set the scene with my introduction. If you look at my first sentence, I said, when I first started working towards my bachelor's degree in financial economics, I believed that social science disciplines could work independently. This is because I realized that in development studies, it's a study of a combination of different social studies, and in my undergrad I only learned economics, so I only learned one of those elements that we will be studying in development studies course, and that's sort of how I loop in that I understand that development studies would expose me to a number of social studies and a number of disciplines. And like I said, I use analogy, so I use chess analogy when I say as if having a queen on the chessboard could lead one to win the game. So this is where I first introduced it. So I thought, because I study economics, if there is an economics issue, then you would think that having just one solution from the angle of economics could really become a solution to that problem. So in this case, I sort of use queen as the analogy, so just one chess piece. But then I said, to win in chess, one must understand the nature of the different pieces, because you can't just, achieve a checkmate with a queen. Maybe you can, but it takes a whole board, not just one chess piece. So that's sort of the way I think about development studies. Okay, now moving on to the body paragraph. One of the chess pieces that really interests me is education inequality, its social economic impact, and its relation to human capital development, specifically in my home country, Indonesia. My interest rose out of my realization of how different I and my other friends who come from more developed cities, such as Jakarta, experience education, and how pursuing my undergrad in the UK has such a monumental impact on my role as a part of the wider community. My intention to study an MPhil in development studies at the University of Cambridge is driven by my ambition to become an agent of change in closing the education gap in my home country that I have seen and experienced myself. I relate so much to this quote by Dr. Hajin Chang, open quotation, "When some people have to run a 100-meter race with sandbags on their legs, the fact that no one is allowed to have a head start does not make the race fair." Close quotation mark. And it sparks this question in me. How can we address the disparities in something as fundamental as education to increase the opportunity for a fair race? So that is my body paragraph, and in the body paragraph you really want to show your interest your ambition, and you have to be very, I mean, at least for me, you have to be unapologetically, you know, passionate and ambitious. For me here is like closing education inequality in my home country, and that's basically the main idea of this paragraph. So one of the papers offered in development studies in my course is actually education and, if I'm not mistaken, human capital development or human development, and that is the specific thing that I want to focus in. Now next, I actually explained why it has become an interest for me, why I really, you know, really want to study that in specific. So when I say my interest rose out of my realization, it then explains why, and it also sort of gave the reader this view, this perspective that, oh yeah, this person did their reflection, and you know, because it comes out of a realization. It's not just like, I think I like something, but you know, you've thought of it. And also what I encountered, and you will see this in my sort of first draft, you have to be very specific, and this is where I say like my ambition to become an agent of change in what? In closing the education inequality gap. And in my first draft, I was being quite vague about it. Like I wasn't sure, like, can I actually say this, because this is such an ambitious goal? But yeah, you just have to be very, you know, unapologetically ambitious about it. And I also mentioned a quote in this body paragraph. I mentioned Dr. Ha-Joon Chang, and Dr. Ha-Joon Chang is the director of the Center of Development Studies, and I have actually read 2 of his books, so that's how I knew this quote, and it really struck with me. And another thing that I'll recommend is also to read the professor that you are interested in that will be teaching you, books, journals, or anything like that. I assure you it will be very helpful. When what you quote from their books, their journals, or whatever it is really hits home, it will make your essay even more powerful. And for me, because I was talking about inequality, this quote, I think, you know, really does it justice, and I couldn't possibly come up with this quote myself, and I think Dr. Ha-Joon Chang in this specific quote really just summarized the nature of inequality really well, and that's why I use it. And at the same time, he's also a part of that Center of Development Studies in Cambridge, and so yeah. Okay, moving on to my closing paragraph. To answer this question, so I was relating to the question before this. To answer this question, I believe that the first step is through educating oneself on how and why the problem existed in the first place. Thus, I found that modules offered in this program, such as Human Development and Education by Dr. Tadashi Hirai, on top of Dr. Ha-Joon Chang's core module in Development Economics, to be very pertinent to my interest of study. Gaining an understanding of the chess pieces through this degree becomes paramount for me to be able to offer and advocate for the solution to achieve the checkmate, a thriving space for education and human capital development. The end. So for closing, you really want to bring together the points that you have mentioned in your introduction and also in your body paragraph and sort of tie it in nicely. And for me, because I use the analogy of chess, I also want to introduce that once again to sort of make things coherent, because if I stop at the chess analogy at the introduction, then it will just be like me trying to fit something in and it will be quite awkward. And so that's why in the last paragraph I actually say that, you know, my sort of career goal here in this sense is that I want a thriving space for education and for human capital development. I actually also mentioned the specific modules, again be specific, that I really want to study, and those are actually the 2 that I will be taking. So I mentioned about human development and education, and also development economics. And so you may see that here I don't really talk about my career goal in specific, and I think this is something that I would have probably done, I'll probably mention more specifically on my, my interest to work in international organizations like World Bank or the UN or UNDP in specific. But when I was writing this, I first wrote this August last year, so August 2020. I applied end of December. From December to like now, which is June 2021, so 6 months, I have had more thoughts and have done more thinking about what I want to do, and now I can confidently say that I really want to get into international organizations. But at the time I was like a bit clueless. I'm like, I'm not too sure. So I just say that I want to create a thriving space for education and human capital development, and I think that's as specific as I could get, but I would probably make it more specific if I could redo this personal statement. Okay, now in this part I'll be sharing a snippet of my first draft. Honestly, it's so bad compared to the final version. It took me 7 iterations of this personal statement to achieve the one that I actually kind of like, which is the final one that I submitted. So you will see that there are a number of things that was discarded, or like people just tell me like, oh, you probably shouldn't be saying this. So my previous version, which is the first ever draft, I'll insert a screenshot here so that you can actually read it if you want. But for the sake of time, I'll just specifically mention which ones are problematic, kind of, and that I took out. This is not the first paragraph, this is actually I think the second paragraph, and I mentioned that the motivation came out of frustration of politicized education and the act of commoditizing education. So I sent this to my professor, and he actually told me like, you may want to avoid negative tones in personal statements. When I first received this feedback from my professor, I actually felt like, oh, but it's important, I want to include this, but now come to think of it, yeah, it is a little bit too personal. He actually told me like, yeah, maybe you could keep the hope part. It also grows out of hope that change can still happen, and with my capacity and knowledge I'm keen to obtain from this education, I hope to contribute. And I decided to sort of keep that, but I make it more specific because here I just said that I hope to contribute, but in my final version I actually say like I want to close the gap. So that's what I changed. The other thing that I also changed is in the next paragraph, where I say, though I have a specific interest in education development, I am ready to be educated and to discover other disciplines. And I mean, if you are studying this course, development studies, you would automatically have to study all the different disciplines, and it is just a little bit like, it's not really needed, like this paragraph, and so I took it out completely. So in my last paragraph, this is where I mentioned that my career goals sort of changed a little bit, because at the time I still thought that I want to do an MBA after doing my master's, but now I don't feel like I'm doing an MBA anymore. I felt like I think I want to do a PhD. So just to let you know that people can change, your plan can change, and it's okay. And so in my first draft I mentioned, yeah, beyond my MPhil studies I want to do MBA, but then I feel like there's just so much noise if I add this in, because like that's another education, and I really want this personal statement to be focusing on my master's of philosophy in Cambridge. And so yeah, I took that out because again, you only have limited characters and you want every single sentence to actually be impactful and significant. Okay, the last part of this video, I'm going to be talking about 2 mini essays that require me to write, which is one on career goals and the other one on additional information. But because I've talked about career goals in the previous section, so I won't be talking about that anymore, I'm going to be focusing on the additional information. So this is very, very vague and is very, very wide. You can literally talk about anything. What I've learned from one of the webinars, you can actually use this section to explain any kind of sort of irregularities in your, say, transcript. So if you fail one module, for instance, in second year or in first year, and there's actually a reason behind that. Maybe you were sick or something happened, force major, whatever. You can actually use this to explain and say like, yep, I failed this, but this was because this and this, and I actually retook it, and then this is the result, something like that. But for me, I included things that I did outside of uni and outside of sort of my responsibility as a student. So most of them are non-academic things that I do. Another tip that I could give, also echoing what I already said in the previous section, is that you want to introduce something that you don't really write in your CV, or things that don't normally fall in a CV or resume. And in my case, I don't really write YouTube in my CV, and so this is why I put social media as the additional information to support my application. And if I can just add one more advice before I close everything, is that send your personal statement to a number of people for feedback. You could ask your lecturer or professor or your teacher. Ask someone who is, if possible, someone who studied or is currently studying at Cambridge as well. And for me, I actually asked two of my friends, not friends, but people I kind of knew from events held by Cambridge, and then I kind of became friends with them, and I asked them if they could help me review my personal statement. So I have 3 people, and then I asked my sister to proofread it for me as well, and I asked my dad also. And a question that you probably want to ask them is, especially if you are asking your friends or family, is, does this personal statement sound like me? As much as you want it to sound perfect, it has to sound like you, because this is where the admission officer could actually get to know you. And I think I'm very happy with my personal statement. I think it really shows me in paper. You would see how it's very different on my Oxford one, but yeah, I'm gonna be talking about the Oxford personal statement in episode 4, so if you are interested in that as well, be sure to tune in. And yeah, episode 4 coming up next week. So there you have it, guys, my Cambridge personal statement and some advice to help you kickstart your own personal statement as well. And if I have missed any tips or advice, you know, if you have heard great advice from other people that you think other people like students need to hear and need to know, please also leave them in the comment section down below, and I will see you in my next video. Bye. Ooh.